Well, I think we're live already. And that's our thumbnail, but that didn't go quite exactly like we planned, but that's okay. I'm Bobby Gilstrap. We're glad to have you joining us today. Today on our podcast, we're doing a reaction and response to the oral arguments, which were just had in the McRaney versus North American Mission Board case. And we want to be able to talk about exactly what's happening. Now, this is the second time this has been before the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court. It was streamed on audio only, so no one is actually seeing what happened in the courtroom other than those who were there. And so today, what we're wanting to do is just kind of highlight that, try to hit on the high points. This has bounced around among several courts. It was thrown out by the Northern District of Mississippi. The court there, the judge made a bench ruling, and then McRaney has appealed this. And McRaney's argument is that this is all about autonomy and each individual organization being able to manage their own affairs as such. And this isn't an issue of doctrine, an issue of faith as such. As has been argued in the past. Joining me today is Michael Voigt. He's a pastor, and glad to have him joining us today. So I'm going to bring Michael on. Michael, good to have you with us today as we reflect on what we've just heard and try to bring people up to speed. Real quickly, give us a kind of in a nutshell, kind of what your initial impression was. And I want us to walk back through some of the arguments that were made today, but then also how particularly the North American Mission Board has kind of changed some of their wording and their language a little bit in the arguments. We have not, obviously, for instance, there was 1,200 something pages, I believe I heard him say, that were submitted in the documents to the court, which the judges or justices have looked at. We obviously have not seen all of that. And so we don't know what all their context is as far as what they've all seen, only what we've heard in court from the attorneys and then the questions that were asked by the justices. So, Michael, give us a real quick kind of a nutshell of what you saw today, and then let's dialogue a little bit about what we saw relative to the entire process, the entire proceedings.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Bobby. So today, what happened was they went before the Fifth Circuit Court, and basically there are two legal principles. I promise you, I'm not going to bore you with a bunch of legal jargon, but there's two principles that when you hear, you ought to have a little ring in your ear. One is the ecclesiastical abstention doctrine. That is one of the whole doctrines that the court's having to consider, along with what is also called the ministerial exception doctrine. And so, in essence, what they have done is within the framework of these two doctrines, the ecclesiastical abstention doctrine has its roots from 1874, I believe, is the first case. In which a Methodist church, if I remember correctly, were arguing over property. And so many times throughout the history, as you follow the rulings on these cases, you have, in essence, the court saying, we are going to stay out of matters of faith and practice within the church. And quite frankly, up until just recently, we as Southern Baptists have said, hey, we like that idea. Stay out of church matters. Absolutely. We want you not to be involved. You do government, we'll do church, and everything will be fine. Well, what happens is now Will McRaney has filed a suit because he says that he has been defamed and treated poorly after he and the entities that be, let's just say that because we've heard that it's operated under a special agreement, and you've got several different entities involved. And in essence, what's going on is NAMB's attorney is saying, listen, you have stayed out of matters of faith and practice and everything the church, and we want you to stay out of this too. And Will McRaney is saying, listen, here's the problem with that. The problem is that there are matters in which I have been wronged by a person or an entity, and you do not have to make any decisions about faith and practice at all. All you have to do is figure out using what we would call objective tort principles rather than religious doctrine. So in other words, what Will McRaney's lawyer is saying is, you don't have to talk about faith and practice at all. We're not trying to get into matters of doctrine and who's right and who's wrong about those things. We're talking about just an actual tort principle, meaning Bobby went out and said something terrible that was untrue about Michael. And therefore, Michael has been damaged, and Michael needs to be able to redress his grievances. And NAMB is saying, well, in essence, you've stayed out of it before, stay out of it now. And their argument today is somewhat saying, well, if you stay out of it now, then what do we do? And
Yeah,
so
well, let's kind of jump into this a little bit, Michael. Just in the past, some of the arguments that we've seen surface and what we've gone back and been able to see from manuscripts from not only the Supreme Court when NAMB took this to the Supreme Court, the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court before, and then the Northern District Court, as it's been in multiple courts at this point. NAMB frequently used language like the Baptist Church, the Southern Baptist Church, obviously inferring that we're all like one. So anything between our organization should be treated as if we're just like the church at that point. And that would be an obvious inference if you don't understand our polity. It seemed like today that some of that had been better clarified, as I'm sure Gant has attempted to do that in their documents submitted to the court to try to help understand that the polity is very unique. It's not like the Catholic Church, not like the Methodist churches. There's not this hierarchy or hierarchical structure. And so they did approach this issue of autonomy early on in the arguments. Gant brought this up. And the judge actually asked, I'm looking back here at my notes a second, he actually asked, well, why does it matter? Was his question, because this seems to be internal dispute, right? And
well,
go ahead.
Well, that is their argument. That's their argument. And let me say, out of everything else that we talk about, for most Southern Baptists, this is the huge deal. This is the biggest deal of all of it. Everything else is kind of secondary. The Southern Baptist Convention and Southern Baptist churches have always been autonomous. I mean, since I was a little boy, knowing my first thing about Southern Baptists, I knew that the Bible was true, that Jesus was Lord, and every church was autonomous. Those were three things that I knew. The problem is that if NAMB wins, and what they're trying to do is say, look, we're all one big happy family. And they're saying, even though we're not legal entities, because how else can you be autonomous other than to set yourself up according to court, the court, you have to legally set yourself up as autonomous. Well, what they're saying is no matter what it legally says, we're kind of all one big happy family. And so therefore you should stay out of our business. And the problem is that if the court accepts NAMB's arguments, then it becomes a very, very slippery slope. So now if a church in Nevada does something by one pastor or one deacon or anyone who's under that one single autonomous church's auspices, then if they do something wrong, then every other church in the Southern Baptist Convention, and not just every other church, but if we're all big one happy family, then why can't they sue the International Mission Board? So that's the biggest deal. That's really the biggest thing. And secondly,
just putting it down
go ahead.
I was just going to say, putting it down just to brass tacks, that is for us as the local member in a Southern Baptist church. That's for us. That's the big deal. Court doesn't care. Court doesn't care. The court's looking at the legality of this, and is this intruding basically on the internal functioning of an organization? And so part of what they did today is they brought up the argument. One of the arguments that Gant was talking about, and they discussed a little bit, was about the strategic partnership agreement. And he stated that NAMB has misrepresented that agreement to be more like a contract, because in the strategic partnership agreement, it uses phrases about objectives for evangelism and reaching people and penetrating lostness and those kinds of phrases that sound pretty normal for all of us in church life, in church work. But the question is, well, does that bind you together as if you're just one, with a Christian minister in any of those organizations? Does that bridge over, in other words? And in fact, toward the end, as we look toward the end of the argument, when Gant came back for his final statements, NAMB presented the issue of things being internal, and they presented a couple of court cases. I don't remember the name of the court cases, but they presented a couple of court cases where they said, look, even though it was related to Presbyterian churches, some Presbyterian churches, and the court chose not to rule in that case because it said it was getting inside the internal workings. They had an internal agreement, and that the SPA, the Strategic Partnership Agreement, formed an internal agreement that said we're all going to be responsible. We have chosen to work together in this way. Therefore, you should not be sticking your nose in, because that has to do with faith and practice and all those other kinds of things. It's part of that religious organization. What did you think about his argument at that point, or that discussion talking about those internal factors being basically because of the Strategic Partnership Agreement?
Well, it seemed clear to me that that Justice Gant didn't get it. It seemed clear to me that he just, and he was asking so many questions.
Gant, Scott Gant is the attorney for McRaney's.
That was the attorney, but
Right.
when the attorney Gant was questioning, I've forgotten the first
the justice,
appeal court judge's name anyway, but the justice there, you could tell he did not understand Baptist polity, and he was he even apologized that he was asking so many questions, and said,
Right.
look, I'll even give you more time, which I don't even know if I've ever heard of that. A judge just saying, hey, I'll give you more time. But he tried to, he was asking questions to try to understand. And then I think later on, there was the female justice who began questioning. I could tell she got it. She understood what was being said, which is that once you get into it, you will understand that the allegations that we're making on behalf of McRaney is a factual matter. It's not a matter of you having to decide whether or not it is morally or biblically correct. It's just a matter of that. Now, I do want to say this, and I think it's very important that your listeners understand this. First off, at the very beginning, along with this conversation, this whole thing that we're talking about now, the two words material misrepresentations were made by Gant, and that's legal terminology for lie. That's when you make a material misrepresentation. What that means is you lied, and the attorney Gant pointed out numerous things in which NAMB had said, for example, not just what they exactly said, but also misleading things, like when they referred to all of our mission programs as the Southern Baptist Church Mission Board. Now, I don't know about you, Bobby, but I'm unaware of that. I'm unaware of that entity. I've never given to that entity. I don't know who that entity is at all. And
that's the language they've used in the court documents before. I didn't hear them say that today.
No.
I was just one example. And again, we haven't seen the printed documents, so we don't know what may have been written in those documents. But along that same line, though, Gant brought this up toward the end. He talked about NAMB using the argument of implied consent, that because of that strategic agreement, because of our cooperative nature, that NAMB is arguing polity is irrelevant. None of that makes a difference because there's implied consent with our cooperation. And he says that they're relying on that implied consent, but it's totally misplaced. In fact, he said, and I thought this was kind of funny. He made the comment that NAMB was trying to brush with big, broad strokes instead of being specific, dealing with the specifics of the case in that case. And he said, as long as it has a whiff of religion in the air, then they want to call it, hey, this is, you got to keep your nose out of it. Okay. And agreed, we don't want the court getting involved in theological issues of faith. They don't need to be involved in that. This is not that. This is not that issue. And Gant was pretty clear about the way he stated that to the court. And to me, I know they have all the context of all the printed documents that they've had submitted from both sides, which is a lot of information to have to read to try to digest down into just this less than an hour. I mean, it was about 50 minutes or so of a presentation between both attorneys, and then a little bit of Q&A at that point. Very, very difficult to see see how they move forward at that point. There were a lot of questions I had just from listening to the attorney from the North American Mission Board. What other questions did it raise for you as you heard the arguments from the North American Mission Board and or Gant for McRaney?
Well, if I may, I want to talk just a little bit more about your implied consent, okay? Because if you follow it, I'll agree, and this is something that's before the court that they're going to have to think about. And here's the problem: the word implied. Okay, when you say imply, what is implied? What I believe is implied may not be what you think is implied, right? That it's almost implied means a suggestive type of idea, as opposed to express, meaning, hey, we have actually verbally expressed it, meaning we've come up with the agreement verbally as to what we agree to, or in writing express. And the problem is what's implied. And the overarching problem with this entire argument is that if the court were to accept NAMB's argument at face value, then more or less in essence, NAMB is always going to have the upper hand, because whoever is the one paying the salary for the employee or the minister or whatever you want to call them, those are going to be the people who make the rules, and those who get paid are going to be subject to whatever those who are paying them are going to decide what the implied consent meant. So that's going to be a huge part of this, as to whether or not how much of this is implied and not implied. And this also, I would say, I always look at these things. I think that we as Southern Baptists don't look far enough ahead. Like I hope that what we start asking ourselves now is what can we do now to prevent this from happening in the future, or at least preventing it from rolling down the hill like a snowball and getting bigger and bigger. And so we may, even as Southern Baptists, have to start questioning, okay, how are our agreements contracted? You know, even as a church, even I as a pastor going to my local church, many times, you know, in the past, not so much now, but in the past, it was a handshake and a hug and God bless you, you're our pastor. And now we may have to start thinking about those things a little more carefully, and dividing possibly matters of faith and practice from matters of employment. I don't even know. I don't know all of the answers, but I know it's time for people smarter than me to start thinking about some answers.
Right. Well, and to be fair, we just need to make sure we'll throw this disclaimer out. Probably should have at the beginning. We're both pastors and ministers. We're not lawyers at that point. But let me bring up from some of my notes here. The North American Mission Board, the way they have argued this in the past, because we're talking about the implied consent, in front of the district court, there's basically two different versions, November 2nd and then December 21st. First, November 2nd of 2018, and December 21st of 2022. But the 12th defense that they presented, and I'm quoting this from the document, NAMB is protected by an absolute privilege with regard to any statements it may have published regarding the plaintiff. So this is where the torturous and defamation is one of the arguments that they're making at this point, among, I believe it's 7 arguments that they're making at this point. And
that is, and by the way, let's just summarize it there and say that is their overall argument to everything. That's their overall argument to everything. Just saying, hey, too bad, so sad. And the question has to become, so we as Southern Baptists too, now we're in a rough spot, right? Because now we're asking ourselves, okay, what is legally acceptable versus what is acceptable as a Christian believer who has a heart to serve the Lord Jesus? Now, I would submit to you that one statement right there has, on its face, there are a lot of problems with that.
Right.
The attorney for NAMB just said, no matter what we said about this guy, it doesn't matter.
Right. Well, and let me bring up one other defense from the same list that I was giving you. That was the 12th defense, that quote, but this quote comes from the 16th defense. It says NAMB is protected by an absolute privilege and or a qualified privilege with respect to all decisions it made and or actions it took, which may have related to or had an effect upon the plaintiff's employment with the BCMD. In other words, just because they threatened to withhold over $1 million in funding, cooperative program money that they're supposed to, be sending to the conventions, they said, we're going to withhold that unless you get rid of McRaney. I mean, that's the argument. That's part of the argument. And what they're arguing back is, hey, look, we have the absolute privilege. That's the phrasing they use. We have absolute privilege. We have the authority to do that because who we are. And this is where they're trying to wrap everything in together. Everything's wrapped together into kind of one big package and saying, look, you have no right to touch us. You have no right to deal with us at all, court. This is all internal. Everything is inferred because of our cooperative agreements, or not that, the strategic partnership agreement, as they call it at this time. And it's all because of implied consent that we should have the right to do what we have done without any repercussions at all. Look, let's wrap it up. What some final closing thoughts, Michael? What do you think?
I just real quick, I would just say there's 4 things that I'm concerned about in a nutshell.
Okay.
And that's what I'd say. Number one, I would say that this seems to say to me, NAMB's argument seems to say that they expect for there to be a complete lack of accountability on NAMB's part from any outside source other than NAMB. I have a problem with that. I think that we as Southern Baptists have a problem with that. We've always overseen our agencies. Number 2, I have a huge problem with the material misrepresentations that have been made by the ERLC and by NAMB. And regardless, what their attorney says is what they are saying. They cannot use the excuse, oh, well, we didn't say that, our attorney said that. Material misrepresentations is the legal word for a lie. And I personally believe that there have been numerous material representations made by the ERLC and NAMB. Now, to their credit, let me say this, we didn't get into this, but and this is important, the ERLC and NAMB agreed that they made several material misrepresentations, which they then agreed with. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3 is I am concerned as to how this ever got this far. Why did the executive committee not step in? And that's what many of us and I'll be honest with you, I'm not a pastor at a large church or anybody who's even known. Everybody's going to be like, who is this guy? I am a nobody. And I'm telling you that we're looking at this thing and we're thinking, well, why do we have an executive committee? Is the tail wagging the dog? And I'm just being quite honest. We're wondering, how did this get this far? Number 4, the last one, which is what we talked about at the beginning, and I'll close with this. If this continues going and the court sees it NAMB's way, and let me answer why is the big deal, because I promise I will not talk to you much about the legal stuff, but here's the bottom line is that the courts in higher jurisdictions have basically half and half seen this both. Like, let's say all of the courts did it. Half of them would say Will was right, and half of them would say NAMB was right if you look at previous rulings. And so this actually has an ability possibly to bring in a precedent that will be used in further cases to judge things like this that happen. But if we're not careful, what's going to happen, like we said at the beginning, this is going to eventually result in a corporate liability for all of the Southern Baptist Convention for wrongs attributed to one individual person or to one church. And not only the churches, but if everybody is one happy family, they can go after not only the convention, not only the churches individually or collectively, but they can also go against individuals, against the International Mission Board, against the North American Mission Board, and any other entity that has a loose affiliation in any sort at all with any Southern Baptist entity. Those are the 4 things that I'm concerned about.
Well, and the reality is, if this stands as it is, as some Southern Baptist leaders have said, as was done in the amicus brief that Northwest Baptist Convention and Randy Adams gathered, the group, they referred to it in the court proceeding today as the Baptist Leaders Amicus Brief. And in that document, as well as others, have stated that this basically changes the way Southern Baptists look. This in essence would change our polity if we make this like one umbrella organization over. It's a connectionality that is not characteristic of Southern Baptists historically. It's a connectionality that connects everything, not only in this kind of a torturous case, but it could be in abuse cases. It could be in all kinds of cases. if somebody slips and falls going down your little church where you are, and somebody slips and falls and they sue and say, hey, look, the handrail was loose on the front steps of the church, and we're suing because you didn't properly care for your property, and then we're going to sue the association, and we're going to sue the state convention, and we're going to sue the SBC, because we can do that because you're all part of one thing. You're all connected, Bobby, in that way.
And Bobby, let me just point out one other thing. In any kind of thing like this, what you can never see ahead of is the unknown consequences from the ruling, the unexpected consequences. Yeah. So let's use that exact thing, which is such a small example, right? But let's say First Baptist Church sits next to Second Baptist Church, right on the main street of town. Right. And First Baptist Church, they haven't kept up with their handrails in 35 years, just like what you said. Second Baptist Church looks over right across the road or right next to them and sees that First Baptist Church has not had their handrails taken care of, and somebody's going to slip and fall one day. Now, all of a sudden, Second Baptist Church is all up in First Baptist Church's business about their handrails. And I'm saying unintended consequences are always the things to bite you, the things that you never thought of, the things you never even expected could happen sometimes. And so all these unintended things, I'm worried about what we can't see.
Well, and the truth of the matter is there are those who have been in Baptist life for a long, long time who are seeing some of these things coming down the road and see that it will drastically change exactly who we are and what we need to be doing as Southern Baptists. Well, Michael, let's go wrap it up for us today. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me on
today, Bobby, to have this discussion. There'll be more coming down the road in the days ahead. Stay tuned.